Good morning, everybody. Thanks for joining this virtual press conference. I hope everyone is making it through the stay-at-home process as well as could be. I've been very pleased with the first two nights of the draft. I think our staff has done a great job of navigating what is a very different draft. Brett and his team have worked very well together, and I'm excited that we've been able to add three really outstanding players to the Kansas City Chiefs.
All right, we'll start with Adam Teicher. Go ahead, Adam.
Hey, Clark, how you doing today?
Great, thanks.
Good. There's probably a million ways of building a championship team, but you've got Pat Mahomes. I was wondering whether there's been any discussions, at least that you've been part of, with Brett, Andy, Tim Terry, whoever, that because of Pat's abilities and because of his maybe generational potential, you guys have to do whatever you got to do to surround him with good offensive skill players. Has that been a talking point for the organization?
Well, my sense is you're asking the question in the context of really building standpoint, and I wouldn't say that's the case, but you are right that a big part of what Brett and Andy have done over the last two plus years is to try to bring in players that are going to make that offense go. Clearly, Pat's a very unique talent, and having great receivers, great running backs, offensive linemen who can block for him is very, very important. But it's not important to the exclusion of building a great defense. I think the last 2 years was a really good teaching point on that we weren't able to get to the Super Bowl 2 years ago because the defense wasn't quite where it needed to be, and we made some big moves last year that really improved the defense, and that got us to Miami where we were able to lift the Lombardi Trophy.
All right, we'll go to Nate Taylor. Go ahead, Nate.
Hey, Clark. When the start of free agency began, just how much of your feeling was to try to retain as much talent from the championship team as much as you could over the course of free agency and obviously before heading into the draft, and just how much have you sort of tried to get an understanding from both Andy and Brett about how the team can sustain its sort of this excellent run over the next course of the next 2 to 3 years versus just maybe being a one-time champion? How did you feel like you, I guess, gave your input in trying to get the team to sustain its sort of success over time?
Well, it was a conversation we had going back really to before the season was over, because you're always working ahead in the National Football League, and we were thinking about the offseason and free agency and players that we might lose and players that we might be able to bring in. And clearly when you have a Super Bowl team, you want to keep as much of that group together, particularly when you have a Super Bowl team where almost every important player is relatively young. Frankly, we were a little bit skeptical that we would be able to keep as many of the guys in Kansas City as we ultimately were able to do. And I think that's a credit to Brett and his staff and the job they did. And I think also the fact that those players want to be in Kansas City. They want to be playing for the Chiefs, playing with Patrick Mahomes and Andy Reid, because they know they've got another shot this year to win a Super Bowl.
Okay, we'll go to Blair Kirchhoff. Go ahead, Blair.
Mark, I just wondered if you're keeping up with your rivals in the AFC West during the draft, and what maybe some of your observations have been with their draft picks.
Well, I won't get into specifics, but you can't help but notice what your rivals are doing, whether they're in the AFC West or just other teams throughout the National Football League that you're going to be competing with. And I think our AFC rivals specifically have had a very good draft. It seems like several of the teams have favored the offensive side with the mentality maybe of trying to keep up with our offense. But I don't want to speak too much to their thinking. But just looking at really across the league, there have been a lot of good players selected. I thought this draft, particularly the first round down into the middle of the second round, I thought it was a very deep draft. And I think a lot of teams have been able to help themselves as a result.
All right, let's go to Pete Sweeney. Go ahead, Pete.
Hey, thank you. Thank you for taking some time. I was just wondering, when it comes to Patrick Mahomes and this contract that supposedly is going to set records as far as NFL history and so on and so forth, with negotiations presumably ongoing, how involved are you in talking to Brett Veach? Like, how often is it? And then when it comes to just your feelings on the matter, do you feel like a timetable is starting to become more clear as to when this thing could potentially get done?
Yeah, so I'll take the timetable question first. I really, can't say it's something that's going to happen in the next, 3 months or 6 months. It's a priority for us, and it's also a priority for Patrick's team. So I know it's something that's going to get done in the near term. Anytime that we're talking about a big contract for the Kansas City Chiefs, I'm intimately involved in those conversations with Brett and his cap staff. And I don't want to say we've been talking about this weekly because Brett's been very focused on the draft. As you know, and I know you've spoken to Brett and Andy, a lot of preparation had to go into turning this into a virtual draft, and that was a challenge for everybody. So, Patrick's contract hasn't been a priority here over the last month, but going forward, it will be.
Okay, we'll go to Harold Kuntz. Go ahead, Harold.
Hey, Clark, thanks for making some time for us this morning. I really appreciate it. I have to ask you a question about, of course, the future going forward of football, obviously with so much uncertainty with the coronavirus. I know Jerry Jones had said something about he does believe football will be played, but has there been any talks with you guys about the possibility of having to potentially have to play in front of empty stadiums? Any plans going forwards about that? And just the season and how it progresses with only training camp, and of course with St. Joe's having training camp. Would training camp be changed and maybe your facility also going forward because of the coronavirus effect?
Yeah, well, I think, unfortunately, the truthful answer to many of those questions is we just don't know right now. We haven't had those discussions as an ownership group in terms of contingency plans for the league. I know it's something that the league has been thinking about. Once we get past the draft, it's something I'm sure that we'll start discussing at the committee level first, and then as an entire ownership. It'll obviously be only prudent to have some contingency plans because we just don't know how the pandemic is going to play out here over the next 3 to 4 months. It's hard to say, what would happen with training camp. I hope we're able to be up there in St. Joe, and that's our plan right now. But there's a scenario probably where that is not possible.
Okay, we'll go to Matt Derrick. Go ahead, Matt.
Hey, Clark, thanks as always for your time. I'm just curious, from looking at the players that you've picked up already, what are your impressions and what do you like about the guys that you've already taken?
Yeah, well, one thing I'll say about all three of the guys, and this came through when I had a chance to be on Zoom with them after they were selected, is how excited all three of them are to be Kansas City Chiefs. They were, I don't want to say stunned, but I think they were very happy to be selected by the Super Bowl champion Kansas City Chiefs. They all three struck me as players who were very eager to get in as soon as they can and get to work. They're guys that really like the game of football, and I think will bring an attitude that will mesh very well with our locker room. Clearly, physically, all three of them are outstanding athletes and football players. Clyde is a very, very exciting, dynamic offensive player. Willie's going to be able to bring some speed to our linebacking core that I think will help us. And then, having another tackle that we can work on developing with Lucas, I think is going to be beneficial down the road.
All right, guys, we've got time for 3 more questions. Let's go Herbie, Adam, and then Nate. Go ahead, Herbie.
Hey, good morning, Clark, and thank you very much for taking the time to do this with us. This is a 2-part question here. You mentioned earlier the challenges of a virtual draft, and I'm curious your reaction on how the league handled it, your impressions of how this process has gone the last couple of days. And then lastly, we're obviously in unprecedented times here. How much has the cancellation of the owners meeting last month in Florida affected the business side of what the Chiefs want to do this year, and also from an NFL point of view?
Yeah, so let's start with the draft. As the league went through the analysis and ultimately implemented the rules that this was going to be a completely virtual draft with everybody separated, there was a lot of angst, I think, around the National Football League, a lot of concern about the logistics. I heard a number of general managers, including Brett Veach, talk about it maybe making trades tough to execute. In truth, the last couple of days, I've been really, really surprised by how well it's worked, both from a Chiefs standpoint and then just watching the broadcast. It seems to be working well around the league. So the league and all the teams did a great job of adapting to it. I think it's the league's put on a tremendous show and has really highlighted a lot of the heroes of the coronavirus pandemic. So I think that's been a real positive. Let's see, the second part of your question was about the owners meeting. Certainly, yeah, the March owners meeting is the most important one of the year. It's, a 3 or 4 day meeting, where we have a chance to get together and really thoroughly discuss a lot of issues, particularly those that are pertinent to the upcoming season. So missing that was impactful. We did have a virtual call in place of that, but that was a couple-hour virtual call, and it's hard to replace what you would have done in three or 4 days. We have a scheduled May meeting where we usually circle back around and handle some of the business that didn't get taken care of at the March meeting. That May meeting, which will be a virtual meeting also, is going to be very important now because there are a lot of decisions that have to be made. Specifically the competition committee report. We didn't do that in March, so we'll have to do that in May, and there'll be some rule changes that we've got to consider at that time.
Okay, we'll go to Adam. Go ahead, Adam.
Hey, Clark. There was a question earlier about what the other AFC West teams are doing, and I won't ask you to go into particulars there, but it's safe to say that they're coming after you. And I wanted to ask you, after all these years, the Chiefs being the hunters, what's that like for this organization now to be the hunted, that you're the ones that everybody's coming after?
Yeah. Well, it's obviously, what we've worked really for 5 decades to do is to get back to the top and to be the best team in the National Football League, to be the team that other teams and their fans aspire to be. It's a great feeling. And, I think, every player we add to the team, you really analyze that player in the context of what he brings to our championship squad. And when you have Patrick Mahomes as your quarterback, it's a very comforting feeling, knowing that you're bringing in players that can help his offense be better or help the defense put the team in a better situation.
Okay, Nate Taylor, you want to close us out?
Yeah, thanks again, Clark. My last question is, in terms of you being brought up through Lamar, understanding the historical context of the league, the competitive balance that makes it so fun for fans and everybody in the franchise, there has not been that many back-to-back champions. And I'm just wondering, based on your history and understanding how the league works, do you feel like you have a good sense of what it takes for teams to become back-to-back championships, why it's so hard to obtain such a feat, and what gives you confidence that this particular group may be the next team to accomplish such?
Yeah, well, I think there are probably a couple of reasons that make it hard for teams to repeat. First of all, as a champion, your schedule's a little bit harder than everybody else. We're going to see the best teams in the AFC as well as many of them in the NFC. So that mechanism makes it tough. I also think there's a possibility or a tendency to have a letdown after you win a championship, after you chase something for a long time. The players and coaches, it's very hard to come back, with the same energy that you had. Clearly, coming out of 2018, we had a little chip on our shoulder, right? We were just on the doorstep, or as Andy likes to say, 4 inches, for making it to the Super Bowl. And so I think that really served as motivation. So that'll be our challenge, is coming back with the same desire and intensity that we had last year. I feel really good about our coaching staff. we're blessed to have Andy leading it, have tremendous continuity across the coaching staff, which you don't often have with Super Bowl teams. I think that's another thing that holds other Super Bowl teams back from repeating. Well, we've brought everybody back there. We have almost the entire nucleus from the player standpoint, and those players are generally on the young side of their careers. So that's not a lot of them saying, okay, I finally got that done. I got that ring that I've been chasing for a long time. I think these guys are hungry. And I also think, maybe this unusual offseason we're having could play to our favor. Whenever we're able to get back together and start practicing, because of the continuity we have at every level, we're going to have a lot of advantages that other teams have. So, those would be my thoughts in terms of our chance. Our goal every year is to win the Super Bowl, but I think clearly Andy has stated already that he wants to be back there on that stage at Union Station next February.